So in our last lesson, we went ahead and created this build volume area using a standard box that we set to bounds. Go over the different tools that we have in both object mode and edit mode. And I might discuss some of the shortcuts that I use because you have different tools based off of whether or not you're using the shortcuts or you're using the tools from the toolbar. So let's go ahead and get started there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and turn on screencast keys, and I'll just discuss with you the various tools that we have in object mode first. So the add cube, I'm going to start at the bottom here. The add cube might be on by default. This is Blender 4.0.2. If you're using an earlier version of Blender, you may not see this. If you have Blender Launcher, you can quickly switch between different versions, and you can see the different tools and the differences and how they're used. Okay, so if you don't see this panel on the right, you can hit N to see that. If you don't see the toolbar, you can hit T, or you can find this tiny little arrow right here, click on it, and it'll pop right out. If your toolbar looks a little bit different, you might be in edit mode, or you might be in one of the other working modes for Blender. So I'm also going to go ahead and turn off some settings from last time as well. We'll turn off edge length for the moment. So you have the add a cube tool. You also have add a cone. And if you just click where your surface indicator is, you can see that it'll add objects wherever you draw. So if you want to add on top of an object or on a wall of an object, you can totally do that. Go ahead and I'll show you the cylinder as well. Make a little flask here. By the way, if you hold a shift, I believe, yep, if you hold shift, it will square up your object, give it a more uniform look. So as you draw, you hit shift, boom, boom. Also, the cylinder is pretty fun to play with. It's great for creating little flat discs, and I'll show you in a later tutorial how to create terrain type objects. UV sphere, and I want to show you the difference between a UV sphere and an icosphere. You may be troubled trying to figure out which one you're supposed to use. So the UV sphere uses more geospatial type coordinates, while the icosphere simply uses a triangulated surface. You can see the difference there. Okay, so we can go ahead and get rid of these. We'll go back to our cube, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it, and we'll turn off snapping for now. Okay, so I'm going to hide our cube. So we'll use our second cube here. So now we have our measure tool. Now I have a different setup, so you might see different shortcuts here. I have emulate 3-button mouse because I have a Logitech MX Anywhere mouse. But if you have a standard mouse and you don't have the emulate 3-button mouse turned on, then you can probably hold Control and then click and then drag to your next corner between vertexes, and it will give you a measurement within, I believe, 2 decimal places. You can do the same thing here. Actually, no, it looks like it's 4 decimal places it will show you. That's pretty cool. Although as you get higher in numbers, it may drop off a decimal place. It may have a limit on how many characters you can put in there. So that's pretty neat. So we have a 150 millimeter cube here, although it is not a perfect cube. Or is it? It is. Never mind. There we go. And the measure tool also allows you to measure angles. So if I measure between these 2 points, and then somewhere in the middle, I go ahead and grab, it'll create a third point that I can drag. If I hold Control, it'll snap to that vertex, and you can see the angle between these 2 points is 45 degrees. If you want to start a measure at a point where there is already a measuring tool started, you'll have to move that point off, hold Control, measure between your 2 points, and then you can move that point back just by holding Control and snapping back to that vertex. And then you can always just grab this guy and snap it over, and then you can see that you have 2 different angles of 45 with different origins. If you want to get rid of a measure tool, all you have to do is click one of the endpoints of it, and you can hit X, and that'll just get rid of it. Okay. The annotation tool is really cool. So you have a few options here. With a 3D cursor, anywhere the 3D cursor is pretty much where it's going to draw. But there's some difficulty with that. I'll show you. So if we orbit around, we can see that the cursor did not determine well, actually, the cursor based off of your view determines the angle that you actually draw on, that you're writing on. So we can see that our angle is determining, or our view angle is determining where we draw, right? But it's not determining the depth, it's only determining the angle, the perspective at which we draw. The depth is actually being determined by our cursor here. So if we turn off 3D cursor and we put it on surface, then wherever we draw on the surface of our object, that is where the annotation will adhere to. If you want to change some more of the settings for annotations, you can always come over here to the right side, hit N, go down to View. Annotations is usually around the bottom. And then you can change the color, you can change the thickness, the opacity, and you can turn off the X-ray. So now only the annotations that are facing you will appear. This can actually be handy for keeping notes on an object if you have a lot of detail or a very large object. This is great. This is a perfect way of keeping notes, putting precise measurements, maybe giving yourself a reminder where something that needs to be worked on is. This is actually pretty cool. And you can always turn off and on the different annotations and keep different colors. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these annotations since I don't need them. But you can always just click and add a new one. But if you don't have any assigned, it will go ahead and create one for you as soon as you start trying to draw. So no sweat there. And you can always rename your annotations to whatever you need to. Okay, so go ahead and get rid of that. We have our transform tool. This is a combined transform tool that combines scale, rotation, and move. It's actually pretty useful. You can do quite a few things with it. You can rotate. Right now we're rotating from origin, and you can move, and you can scale. That's pretty cool, right? So something to keep in mind is that this tool doesn't offer all of the same things that just using the shortcuts does. And it also doesn't offer the individual control that you have from using one of the specific modes that you have here. For instance, this tool right here, it only seems to allow you to rotate. It doesn't actually allow you to scale, where if you had scale turned on and you grab the circle, it would actually let you do that. So there are some complex limitations there, but this is a really good tool for quickly placing things around a scene or for quickly arranging things in a non-specific, non-detailed way. This is a great tool to use. If you use the scale, there is a little bit more control because you can use the individual axes a little bit more precisely, and it's not so confusing of a tool to use. You also have these scale along 2-axis options here. So if you notice, this is in between the Y and the X, this little blue box. If we grab it, it will scale along the Y and the X only. Same thing for here, and same thing for here. That option doesn't seem to exist here for the multi-transform tool. So something to keep in mind. Also, for the scale tool, we've got the scaled cage. The cage works a little intuitively. It actually will allow you to scale from the opposite of the corner that you grab. So think of it like basically any other vector suite where you want to scale along a vector. So if I grab this corner, it will scale to the opposing corner. Same thing here, and same thing with the faces. Okay, so it makes sense. That's cool. It is actually a really handy way for scaling objects, even if they have complex geometry, because it will, even if it's applied, it will stick to the volume of the object, and a very non-confusing way of scaling large objects, rearranging them, generally making them prettier. But alas, I digress. This is not a tool that very many creatives use, especially on YouTube. You'll find very few people actually using it. So if you're confused by this, you've never seen it before, totally makes sense. The rotate tool is pretty much exactly what it says. You have your different axes here that you can rotate along, X, etc. You know what? I'm going to go back and I'm going to get rid of this subdivision. I don't want to ruin our nice little cube here. Okay, so we can go ahead and we can rotate along the Z-axis, X-axis, and Y-axis. Again, we're rotating it from the origin. If we want to rotate from something other than the origin, like the 3D cursor, we can do that. We can also do bounding box center, although bounding box center still uses the origin as its operator. If you want to change the origin, you can, but what you might want to do is snap the cursor to selected. So now that the cursor is there, then you can come over to the 3D cursor here, and you can just bring it up a little bit. Since we know the volume of our cube, 150 millimeters, we can move our cursor up about 75. So right now it's at 0. If we move it to 75, it will put it in dead center of our cube. And now if we rotate with the 3D cursor selected, it will rotate from there and give us a little bit more precision. So you have options without screwing up your origin point. Although if you rotate your cube in this context, you may want to move your origin point so it prints right. Okay, we can move on to the move tool. So move allows you to move your object, of course, obviously, along these axes the same way that the other tools did. But also something to bear in mind is that each of the tools, the move, rotate, and scale, they don't have something built into them that is very handy with shortcuts. You have to physically grab the individual axis, which may not seem like a huge issue for you, especially if you have great mouse control. Hello, Fortnite players. But if you are somebody who doesn't have great mouse control, maybe you're not a gamer, and you would like to just use shortcuts for quicker access, you can always do that. All you have to do is hit G to grab, This will allow you to move, R for rotation, and S for scale. And if you select an axis after hitting one of those commands, then it will allow you to use that axis as your scale, rotate, and move vector. So in this case, let me go ahead and move this to 3D cursor is probably good for now. And then if I hit R to rotate, you notice it doesn't change the toolbar menu at all. Nothing is happening there. So I can just hide it. And then if I hit R to rotate, I can hit RZ, and it will lock to the Z axis, RX, RY, GX, GZ, GY, same thing, and same thing for scale. Now, keep in mind that we're scaling from the center of our object. So if you want to scale like we were with the box scale, we can always do that simply by putting the origin on one of the outer walls. Now remember, if you hit Shift and you right click, you can move the cursor to a wall. So now if we scale on the Z, it's going to scale from our cursor. But let's put the cursor on the bottom instead. We could put it over here. Very powerful. Very powerful. We could put it over here. Okay? So you can see it's a very powerful tool. Now I am scaling along the axis, but I'm scaling from the cursor. Nice. Okay, so we have covered the majority of our tools in object mode, but we haven't really covered them in edit mode. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. T to show our tool panel. And in edit mode, we can see we have a number of additional tools here. So of course we have all the same tools we had before. And if you add objects here, it will simply add the mesh to the same object in object mode. So bear that in mind. If you want to extrude, you can always just click the extrude. And if you Control 3 to select a face, then you can extrude, obviously. You also have some modes here. I'm not going to cover all these modes right now, but you can access the same modes depending on whether you're in vertex, edge, or face mode. I will cover extrusion and selection at length later. You also have inset. So if you grab inset and then you move towards the center of that line, it's really hard to see, I know. But you can see that jagged line right there. If you move towards the center, then it will increase your inset. Same kind of thing with the extrusion. If you pull away from the center, then it will extrude. With bevel, kind of the same thing. You pull away, it will bevel. With the loop cut tool, it's a little bit different. You're just adding mesh here. So you're adding geometry for adding details later. It doesn't actually add any details. All it does is give you additional geometry to work with so you can add details later. You can also knife. Knife tool is very handy. It allows you to effectively draw where you want to add those details, those geometries rather. And if you hit enter, it will go ahead and apply those cuts. So if you notice, if I come from this point, it will snap onto that point. And then I can also snap onto that point, and then I can come over here and I can snap onto that point. But if you notice, even if I right click, I'm still in knife mode and that geometry is not real. It hasn't been added yet. I have to hit enter, and then once I hit enter, then that geometry is real and has been added. And I can now create knife marks along those geometries and add further geometry to it. Just hit enter, and there you go. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and Z and undo some of our loop cuts here and our knife marks. The poly build tool is a little bit different. It allows you to grab poly and move it around just by clicking on a vertex. If you hold shift, it will allow you to quickly delete faces from manifold edges. And if you hold control, it will allow you to create additional geometry just by grabbing it. If you grab an edge, it will extrude it immediately. If you grab a vertex, it will move the vertex. Actually, it looks like it might be extruding vertexes. No, it's just moving the vertex. Okay, good. The spin tool, ooh, let me cover the spin tool really fast. You're gonna love this. I'm just gonna show you a quick illustration. So if I hit Control Z a bunch of times and add our cube back, remember we still have another cube we can use. But if we add our cube back, I'm gonna turn on vertex merging here. And if I hit A and S and 0, it will merge all of our vertexes into a single point. Now I can hit 1, and if I snap this, oh, can I snap from here? I don't think I can. So what I'll do is I will snap origin center of mass. Does that actually do anything? I don't know. Nope, sure doesn't. Okay, so the cursor's right there. If I right click, set origin to 3D cursor, and then if I snap this to cursor to world origin, and then I snap that to the cursor, now it's down here. Now in edit mode, if I go back here to just selection mode, With merge vertices turned on, auto merge vertices, if I hit E and nothing happens, then there's a problem. E, nothing's happening. Why isn't anything happening? Well, because I have face mode selected, I need vertex mode selected. We only have a single vertex. Okay, so how many vertexes do I have selected? 1. Okay, we're in business. So if I hit E, I can bring this over, and we're inside of our build volume, so that's great. So now I can literally model without having to worry about the geometry being something that is unobtainable. Now, let's say that that is a bad profile for a vase. It actually looks pretty good. I'm surprised at how good that looks. We can always bring in a reference image. This is something that's not on the toolbar, but it is a tool. So we hit Shift A in object mode. You might not see this menu if you're not in object mode. We can add a reference image, and then from my downloads, I can add this little vase image I have here. By the way, if you try to add an image and you can't see previews and you need to see thumbnails, over here on the right side of the dialog for adding an image, you can expand into much larger icons, and now you can actually see image previews. So I'm going to scale this down so it fits within our build volume. Okay, and now I can draw this general shape using our little vertex here. Okay, so now what I can do is I can go ahead and turn this back on, duplicate it, hide that, grab my duplicate, edit mode, S0. Now I'm back to a single vertex down here. Vertex merging is still on, so we know it worked. Now if I hit E, I can extrude this vertex. It may be hard to see, and I will cover how to change the 3D viewport settings so you can see edges and vertex easier if you have a hard time with that. I'm going to bring this over, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on vertex snapping, and then what that'll allow me to do is snap that vertex along the x-axis to my bottom vertex. It's really hard to see down here, I know. So now if I just leave that as is, I have this profile. I can hide my reference image. I have this profile of a vase. Now I realize the bottom's not flat. I'll address that in a second. So now that I have this profile, what I can do is I can go into edit mode on it, select it, and because I have my cursor right here at the center as well as my origin, if I hit the spin tool, now with the spin tool open, I can just add some spin, and you can see that the angle is 82, but if I do 360, it will go all the way around once, and the vertexes will overlap. And if I have auto merge vertices turned on right here, they should, in theory, actually merge. It looks like they did. That worked. So now I have this nice vase. Now, I did not mean to actually give it a top, so we can go ahead and select these. I'm going to hit C, circle select, and I'll cover selections at a later time as well. Hit X, delete faces, and now I have this nice vase, and I'll show you quickly how to make it viable. If I go to vertex mode, go back to the tweak tool, and I select this edge loop of vertexes, and I select that vertex in the middle. If I hit SZ0, it will flatten out those vertexes. And now if I hit Control 1, Control 2, if I still have that edge loop selected, I can go up to Item, in Edge Data, Mean Crease, flatten that out just to make it look pretty, shade smooth. Go ahead and add a subdivision. And now we have a really nice looking vase. But if you try to 3D print this, you might run into some problems. So really quickly, I'm going to show you how to correct the normals. I know I'm off on a tangent here, but I want to show you how this works. So in the overlay settings, oops, I turned them off. You can come down here to face orientation, and you notice if everything's red, that means that the outside is on the inside and the inside is on the outside. So we need to flip the normals. Blue on the outside is good, red on the inside is perfect. That means all the normals are facing the right direction. I'll explain that more in a second. So now we add the solidify. The solidify will add 10 millimeters of thickness by default. You probably want this to be something like, if you want a single wall vase mode print, 0.4, or whoops, that's 0.1, that's way too thin. 0.4, that is a single wall right there, 0.4 millimeters. So if you have a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, the E3D V6 standard, you can set it just like that. Or if your single wall is going to end up being 0.2, 0.6, 0.8, you can just set that right here. And then whenever you bring it into your slicer, it will be good to go. So now you have this vase that is manifold. It is ready to be 3D printed. All you have to do is export it. I just show you really quickly. I've probably showed you before, but you can export STL. You can do selection only, apply modifiers, and that should be it. And you can export it right away and then bring that right into a slicer. It may ask you to convert units because our units are set to millimeters. even though it should be set to meters. Something about exporting from Blender, it will always mess that up. And you'll just have to correct it using the slicer, but you should be fine. Okay, so now we have our vase set up. We can see that our vase is 150 millimeters by 89 by 89. If we want to make that bigger, as long as our origin is on the bottom, we can scale that right up as big as we can to fit our area, our build area. Right now, our build area is 235. We can always create another build area that is for each 3D printer. In X1 Carbon's case, 256, and you'll be fine. Okay, I think for the Prusa, it's 230 by 210 by 210. I could be wrong. 250 by 210 by 210. I can't remember, honestly. I've been using the X1 Carbon a lot lately. So now we have our vase using the spin tool. That was a very quick trick just to show you how that's done. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Actually, you know what I'll do? I'll leave this in the project file in case you want to try to 3D print this, and I'll move this along the X, and I'll turn back on our other cube. I'm going to go ahead and just hide this for now, and you can see spin tool vase. There you go. And you can 3D print that if you want to. If you want the project files, you're going to have to subscribe to everlasting.media. So now we have our cube back, and I'll just go into edit mode, and you can see the rest of these tools. Now you notice these tools are green, these tools are white, and these tools are purple. What is the difference between these different types of tools? Well, these tools being white allow you to make changes to the whole object. These tools allow you to make notes or gain information about the object. This tool allows you to add objects. These tools all allow you to modify the object, the actual mesh of the object itself. And then these tools allow you to move the mesh around, not necessarily create new geometry, but just move the existing geometry around. Okay, that's what all the purple tools do. Now the rip region allows you to tear apart the geometry, but you can't add new geometry with it. The poly tool will let you delete faces, but it will effectively allow you to create new geometry by moving it around and triangulation. But it's a little fuzzy, and the logic behind the color coding of these tools and some of the different types of tools are less important than learning the shortcuts, because the shortcuts will do more for you in the long run. The only tool that I don't use by shortcut is the spin tool, and I probably could once I get to use it a little bit more. So you have the smooth tool. The smooth tool is very helpful if you have extra geometry. I'm going to go ahead and subdivide just by right-click subdivide a few times. I know that's the wrong way to do it. If you right-click subdivide, you can just grab this and drag it up and create more geometry really quickly that way. So now I have a bunch of vertexes. I'm going to select a vertex, Control plus to select more from that vertex. Control plus will allow you to select more from faces, vertexes, edges, just by hitting Control plus. And then what I can do is if I grab the smooth tool and I pull on my little toggle here, the randomize will occur. And if I push, then the smoothing will occur. So you can kind of create little bubbles if you wanted to, or smooth out faces that are misbehaving. Just be aware that the scale of your object, if it is not 1, then these tools may skew your object. But then again, there is a skew tool down here. So you have the vertex slide and edge slide, or yeah, the edge slide and vertex slide. These are kind of useful, but you can do the same thing just by double clicking, or actually alt clicking an edge loop. And then you can just GG and slide it around. I have snapping still turned on. GG will allow you to slide your edge loop around. But if you use this tool, then you can always do the same thing. It gives you a little bit different of a reaction, and it gives you different indicators than just GG does, but you may prefer GG. It just depends on how you work. The vertex slide is kind of similar. You can grab an individual vertex, move it around, and it gives you a little bit of information, but you can do the same thing with GG again. I think it's actually the same indicators for GG there. For the shrink and flatten tool, the shrink tool, these don't behave intuitively, in my honest opinion. The shrink flatten tool will take geometry that you would normally expect to behave a certain way, and it will end up causing it to crash and crush and flip its faces inside out. If you just expand it, then it's the inverse of shrink or flatten. It doesn't do either of those, but it will create bulges. It's a really clever way of just creating little surface defects that might be handy for like a Fortnite game, or depending on whether or not you're making like mushrooms. If these are circles instead of squares, then you might have little spots that you can pop out. Whatever your heart desires. Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and Control Z a bunch of times and get rid of this. And we'll get rid of this effect as well. And I have a lot of undo space here. There we go. Okay. So with push-pull, kind of the same thing, except you would expect the push-pull to work like Fusion 360, where this face pulls or pushes, but instead it actually pushes and pulls all of the adjacent geometry instead. It's kind of counterintuitive, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me the way it works. If I go ahead and subdivide this a couple times, you can see, yep. So it does kind of push-pull those faces if they're inside of adjacent faces, but even then, it doesn't behave the way you would expect it to. If I grab these, yeah, it really doesn't behave the way you would expect it to. This kind of behaves like a bulldozer. Very few use cases for this one. Okay, so for shear, shearing works in the least intuitive of all the tools as far as I'm concerned. Instead of appearing from your selection, it will appear from your origin, or from the cursor, maybe. Yeah, so right now we have it set on cursor. If we set it to bounding box center, it may actually go to your faces. And then even if you do manage to get the face selection to work, you may be surprised at how unintuitive this tool is. But if you're just using some simple geometry, you may get the effect you want with shear. Although, why would you use this instead of just using RZ? Maybe shearing is what you want. I don't know. All I know is it's a tool that I use very, very little.